All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Binding Status. It looks like we've already got some viewers on, so that's great to see. Just to give you a little bit of heads up, we're doing this through a Zoom call, and so there might be a slight delay in our conversation here. So if you have any comments or questions, when we get to those, it might be a little bit delayed, but we'll try to answer those as quickly as possible. If this is your first time watching the Binding Status, this is a show about Crossplane and Kubernetes and how Crossplane can interface with other projects in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And that's especially what we're going to be focusing on today. But before we get to that, I want to call out a few viewers in the chat here. So it looks like we've got Sangam, who looks like he knows Ramiro. And then we have Marcus and Phil, who both work on Crossplane. They're joining from New Jersey and Seattle. So it's great to have y'all joining today, and anyone else who joins will try to mention you as well. So with that said, I want to get to introducing Ramiro, who's joining us today as the co-host, which is really exciting. We really appreciate him coming on. So I'll go ahead and just mention that he's the founder and CEO of Okteto. So we're going to be showing how Crossplane and Okteto can work together, and especially just kind of how Okteto works under the hood today. So Ramiro, do you want to introduce yourself and just tell a little bit about what you're working on and anything else you think would be interesting?
Yeah, no, for sure. Hi, everyone. Dan, thanks for having me here. This is super exciting. I'm Ramiro, one of the founders of Okteto. And yeah, at Okteto, we're working on DevTools, and this is a space I've been working for a very long time. I used to live in Seattle, actually, so Phil, hi there. Seattle, I lived there for 5 years while working for Microsoft. I was part of the team that started on Azure. And yeah, I was born in Mexico, been in the US for a while, working on this super cool space, and I'm really excited. We've been working directly on Kubernetes for the last couple of years, and it's been so much fun. And hey, Sangam, I want to say hi to Sangam. Sangam is the organizer of the Okteto meetup in Bangalore, which is a really cool community that we have down there. So thanks if anybody else is online from that community. Thanks so much for being so passionate, for your feedback, for using it, and for sharing Okteto with other people. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro. That's super cool that we've got people joining from all over the world. So today, what we're going to go through, and I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here. We're going to go through primarily first Okteto and just kind of how you can get started using it. And then we'll go through how that can be used together with Crossplane. So Ramiro mentioned that it's a tool for local development environments on Kubernetes. So we're going to show kind of the value of that, and then also about how managed services can get introduced to that, and you can inject credentials and that sort of thing via Kubernetes secrets. So it should be a really cool demo. And while I'm driving some of it, Ramiro is going to give us a little bit of insight into what's happening behind the scenes. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and create a new Kubernetes cluster, and we'll just create it on GKE. And as you know, to use Okteto or Crossplane, we're going to need a Kubernetes API server. So we're just going to go ahead and set one up here. So this will take a little bit of time to come up. And once that's ready, then we'll install Crossplane, install Okteto, and get going. So the first thing I want to look at is let's head over to the Okteto repo. So Okteto is open source, which we really appreciate on this show, as we are an open source project over at Crossplane. And it's really cool to see what they're building over there, and also just have a sense for where the project's going and that sort of thing. You can also check out Okteto, the website, which allows you to kind of have a hosted namespace experience. And I'll definitely let Ramiro talk about that a little bit more. But while that's going on and he wants to talk about it, I am going to install the Okteto CLI. So Ramiro, do you want to mention a little bit about Okteto, the open source project, and then Okteto, the SaaS product, and a little bit how those work together?
Yeah, of course. So the Okteto open source project is a CLI. It's all based on Go. You can see the code there. And it's CLI that you install locally in your machine. And what it does is there's a main command, Okteto up. When you do Okteto up, what happens is that the tool will deploy a dev environment into any Kubernetes cluster that you have. What we do that's different, that's kind of like cool, at least I think so, is that you can target any part of your cloud native application. Let's say you have a multi-service application and you want to target one of your deployments, and you can swap the Okteto dev environment with that specific deployment, and then you can develop directly in your cluster integrated with your application. The other thing we're doing is you're going to swap this dev environment, and you'll see it. That will show us a little bit later. We're going to give you a remote terminal, and then we start a file synchronization system service between your local environment and this dev environment in your cluster, so that you can still code locally. You're using your IDE, any of your local tools, but whenever you save a file, we'll synchronize the file, and then you can pick it up from the environment. If you're using a language like PHP, Node, Python, you could just set up a hot reloader to automatically see the changes. If you're using something like Go, Java, you can still compile, see the changes. And the idea behind this is just to make your experience when you're building cloud native apps a lot faster. One of the things we saw early on when we started with Okteto was that we were waiting a long time for containers to be built and be deployed when we were like building applications. So our idea with Okteto is remove that phase when you're coding, write code, save file, refresh your screen, see your full application, and then once you're done, sure, you send your PR, CI/CD, then you build your containers and all that. But we really want to make this this inner loop when you're coding as fast as possible, so you can just focus on building something cool and not on staring at Docker built logs. And as far as from there, we created Okteto.com, which is the company behind the open source project, and we have a hosted service where we give you what we call internally kind of like a namespace as a service. It's a service where if you want to run any type of app really, and you don't want to manage your infrastructure, you can use that. And it integrates particularly well with our open source project. It's a nice, you log in, you can see a dashboard, you see your applications, your dev environments, and you can do a lot of things from there. And what's cool is that it's free for developers. When you log in, you get 3 namespaces, dev, stage, prod, and you can run any app there. You get 4 CPUs, 8 gigs of memory, and there's some restrictions, but you can deploy pretty much any application. We have a few there already for you to try, and we keep adding anything, more applications every few weeks. So if there's anything that you want us to try, let us know. And everything is open source, like the open source, the CI is open source. So if you want to collaborate, we're always looking for people to open issues, try new things, suggest features, even send PRs.
Definitely.
It looks like the cluster is up and running, or almost there.
Yep, it's getting started up here, so we can go ahead and get started installing Crossplane. So you saw that command earlier that Ramiro was mentioning, so it's really easy to get started here with installation. They just have a script that you can curl right here. I've actually already done that, so you probably saw me do it while Ramiro was talking, but I've already got the CLI installed here, so we can see the different commands he was mentioning. Up, namespace, restart, that sort of thing. A big value that I got out of it is Ramiro mentioned that it will create the deployment for you for your application in your specified namespace. You also can provide your own deployment, which can be really interesting if you want to inject secrets and that sort of thing, which we'll see later on. And you can just point Okteto to the namespace, and as we'll see momentarily, you've got this Okteto YAML, which is basically your config file for running it. And it will automatically find the name of the deployment that you've already created. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and install Crossplane. So we've done this many times before, and I'm going to install Stack GCP with it here because we are going to use that shortly to go ahead and provision a database. So creating the namespace, and we'll pull the latest version of Crossplane master. All right, so it's been added. And if we now look in our Helm repos, we'll see that we have the Crossplane master version. And so we want to install with this chart version mentioned here. And I think I actually have the command with the latest already written down here. Once again, per usual, we will be putting this documentation and all of this code in the TBS repo. So if anyone wants to run through this afterwards, feel free to look there. We'll make sure to tweet it out when it's ready to go. These docs are still a little loose. So I'll go ahead and I think I've got the latest there. So we'll go ahead and install this into the cluster. So since we set these cluster stack install for GCP on master to true, then that will go ahead and install stack GCP alongside Crossplane in the stack manager. So we can look at the pods here. So we see Crossplane, the Crossplane stack manager coming up. We now see the stack GCP init container starting, and shortly we should see, hopefully. Oh, good. Installing software updates. Maybe we'll do that later. And we should see stack GCP coming up here. So now it's running. So that installed all the CRDs we need, both for application portability on the Crossplane side, as well as the GCP specific managed resources and classes that we use to provision new resources on GCP using our cloud provider credentials. But first, we're going to basically walk through the example that Okteto has for Go here. So I think I pointed to it earlier, but there are a lot of really nice getting started samples with different languages that can help you get going. This is showing it using Okteto as a service. We're just going to use the open source project completely with this Kubernetes cluster we just spun up and show how that works. So
that's something I wanted to mention, that we get this question all the time, and Okteto works with any Kubernetes cluster, Minikube, K8s, K3s, the Okteto service, GKE, any of them. So even if you don't want to use the managed service, still the CLI is something you can use, even if you're using something like OpenShift, PKS. It works at the deployment level. So as long as your Kubernetes distro has deployments and it's API compatible, Okteto should work. And if not, go to the repo and file an issue, and we'll make sure it works. I really want this to work on any Kubernetes out there.
Definitely, and that's a really good point. And I think that's something that's just really nice about the Kubernetes ecosystem is all these projects like Okteto, Crossplane, and many others are standardizing on this Kubernetes API, which means, whether you're running on-prem, on a cloud, wherever you are, there's kind of a constant distributed operating system that everything is compatible with, which makes the installation process just so much easier. So yeah, that's a really good thing to point out there. So as we mentioned, I'm going to create the deployment before I actually get Okteto running. If I didn't, Okteto would actually create a deployment that looks just like this for me. But I'm going to show a few things with modifying the deployment. So I'm going to do it from our manual configuration. So let's do this in a new namespace, and we'll just call it Okteto. So we should see that we have the Crossplane system, which is where our controllers for Crossplane are running, and then Okteto is where we're going to do our actual development. So I'll go ahead and we're in app 1 here. So I'm going to go ahead and create that deployment that we mentioned. And let's see if the pods are coming up here for us. Yep, so we have our Hello World pod running here. So now what we want to do is bring up the Okteto CLI, which is going to configure our local development environment. And when I do that, I'm going to let Ramiro talk a little bit about what's happening behind the hood. But it's going to allow us to basically hot reload essentially our local development app. So I'll go ahead and get started on that, and it's going to find this Hello World deployment here for us. So the command to do that is just Okteto up, and I'm going to specify in the namespace Okteto. So Ramiro, do you want to talk about a few of the things that are actually happening right here?
Yeah, no, of course. So when you run Okteto up, the first thing that you have to check on is Okteto is using this manifest, okteto.yaml, very simple manifest where you're going to tell the CLI which deployment you're going to swap, which is it's either a name or a label. If you're using something that has dynamic names, you can also pass like a label selector. The image, which is which image you want to use as a dev environment. We built a bunch of images for the most common languages, but that's something that I really like is you can use any Docker image you have. And in this case, there's a command bash. On top of that, you can also select certain volumes that you want cached on your dev environment. This is the case of Go, for instance, it's kind of useful because when you build Go apps, there's this build cache, you have your packages that you have to download every time you build. So typically when you're doing a Docker build, you have to wait for a long time for these things to be downloaded. But with Okteto, if you put those in a volume, those are going to be cached. That's really cool. The other thing you can also do is it can automatically start some port forwards for you. In this case, for instance, 8080 and 235. And that is one, so you can access your application just going localhost. And the other, and that's on our sample, you can also connect things like debuggers. You can do reverse proxies, all these other things that your app might need. So when you do Okteto up, the CLI will get the information from here. And the first it's going to do is it's going to find the deployment. Once it finds the deployment, we're going to add certain things to it. We're going to add a volume, which is that you see that it's provisioned, a volume so that your code is cached on here. And then we're going to inject a binary. We're using this open source project called SyncThing to do the file synchronization. So we start one SyncThing instance on your deployment. If you do PCS aux, you'll see it there. There's another instance in your local computer. And that is what's doing this behind the scenes magic of synchronizing your code. We'll also synchronize all your code into dev environment. So if you do ls la on this remote shell, you will see that all your code is already there. And every time you unify your code, it will be synchronized. And the other thing we do there is when you run, if you have something like bash as your command, we'll automatically open a remote terminal for you. You don't have to do this if you want to run directly your server, like in the case of Python, you could just have Python app py as your command. That works as well. It really depends on how you want to work. In this case, for the sample, we did it in a more step-by-step way, so you understand all the different pieces. And in this case, you can just go run main or build a binary. And one of the cool things is because you have a terminal, it really works just as your local terminal. In this case, it's an Ubuntu-based image. It's pre-installed with Go, it's pre-installed with the debugger. And this is one of the ideas with Okteto is give you this dev environment that you pre-configured once. And then every time you launch it, it's going to be there waiting for you. Whenever you're done with something, you do Okteto down, it will go back to your application. And whenever you launch it again, because we store a lot of things in a volume, the sync will be faster. You don't have to re-download your dependencies, all of these things. And it's all based on Kubernetes resources. So anytime you just do kubectl all in your namespace, and you'll see all the things we created.
Awesome. That's super cool. And everyone can see how fast this came up and how quick we can get going here. And so we ran our main.go here, and it said we start our hello world server. So let's see what this actually is. Looks like just a simple web server that's serving this hello world page. So it said we're forwarding from 8080. So let me get this open here and let's see if it's available. All right, so there's our hello world. And I'll show here quickly if we want to stop this here, and let's just change something in our code. So let's just say hello TBS and see how easy it is to hop back over here, run main.go again. And when we refresh, we get hello TBS. So this just greatly simplifies the development experience. You're running right in Kubernetes. You get a lot of value. Another thing I want to show here with this functionality is I mentioned earlier about using different variables and that sort of thing in your deployment. So I'm going to quickly do, let's stop this and do Okteto down. And I'll exit this for now. And what I want to do is say, let's see, I'm going to pull this from over in my K8s.yaml over here. So we're going to do just a environment stanza in our deployment over here. And we'll say name is just TBS message, and the value is going to be hi all TBS viewers. All right. And then in our application here, we want to get that environment variable. So it's TBS message. And we'll call this message. And we'll just send that out. So what we want to do here is, once again, redeploy the deployment here. And let's see. All right, so the deployment is configured. And then we'll do Okteto up and Okteto again. And I believe, Ramiro, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I had just kept Okteto up and let's say jumped down to another terminal window or something like that and redeploy my deployment, reconfigured it, would those environment variables just be available immediately, or would I need to do down and then back up for the Okteto?
So that's one restriction we have on the CLI, that you have to do down and up to get the changes on the manifest. Same thing if you want to add something on a Okteto YAML, like another port that you want to be forward or something like that. Those are limitations, because what we do is we change the manifest. So if you do down and you just do up again, the manifest interjection we do, it gets kind of out of sync. But it's something we're working on. It's one of the things we want to really make it easier, because it's very confusing when that happens. If you're using the Okteto Cloud, if you connect with Okteto Cloud, because there we can run things behind the scenes, this doesn't happen. And that's something we're trying to figure out how to bring to the open source. But
awesome. Well, that's great to hear. And let's refresh this. And let's see. Looks like I might have missed the name here on, okay, TBS message. And let's see. So it should be coming through here. I might need to go ahead and let me bring this down again.
Do a set. See, that's one way you can see the environment variable, because they all show their environment variable. So just make sure that it's there.
Right. Let's see. And I'll just grab.
Oh, someone is making a comment that I think we have the wrong variable name.
Oh, are we?
Instead of an underscore or something like that.
Let's see. TBS message. And TBS message.
Looks okay.
Looks
Let's
right.
do that down and apply again. Maybe the change didn't.
Let me also check the deployment here, because I tried this out. Let's see. Marcus is still saying that we've got the wrong. So we've got the underscore there, and
I mean, it's there. It's just very. I think it's just because with the font color, you can't really tell the space.
Right.
From the underscore.
All right, let's try out and see if we can get the, let's see, in Okteto, and we'll do OEM. All right. So let's see here. Did I miss it? Looks like I did.
Yeah, I don't think it's there. There's the M section, but.
I definitely was able to get this working.
Yeah, no, just do a down and then an apply, and let's make sure that the change got applied, and then we just do up again.
Cool.
Maybe the down.
I think that I actually did not. Yeah, I think that my Okteto down earlier, I think I ran it while still in the CLI. So let's.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Just do that now. Do the apply first.
Oh, right.
I think we deleted the deployment. So yeah, this is actually one of the things we want to fix to make sure this is more obvious, because this is the one point where if you don't get the sequence right, things are confusing. But once you do down, apply change to your manifest and do up again, And then our code will inject all the things again. In this case, just do a echo if you want to try it first, or you actually just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, let's just see if it comes up. I think it should here. Let's see. We're still not getting it. Let me try deleting the deployment and bring it back up. I think that worked for me
That's
in the past. Let's see. I'm gonna see if it's here again. All right. Let's try it one more time. I bet this works for us.
Yeah, for sure. And just do a get of the deployment just to see if it's there, to make sure.
Right. All right. Looks like it's running for us. And Okteto. All right, let's give it a try here.
All right, third time's a charm.
I'm gonna see if we can find it. There we go.
Okay.
So now it's gonna be present here in our output.
Yeah, and this is something that you can leverage a lot, especially. Oh, there you go. Yay.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a more complex app, is one way, and I'll show later. But if you need, you're in the Kubernetes environment, so variable secrets is going to be running on the same service account that your deployment is running. So all those things, especially once you think of this in the context of an application, it's the small details that make your life simpler by being able to develop on the same world that your app will be running from day one, instead of building things locally and then finding out all these integration points at the very end.
Right, for sure. And one other thing I wanted to show, because I think this is really cool functionality, is let's see. It's the manifest reference here. So you can actually, from the Okteto configuration, inject your own environment variables, and you can override the ones in your deployment. So I was actually trying this out earlier, which you could think of if you wanted to have like your production deployment here, but just when you're running it locally, you want to replace that with like your dev database connection or something like that. Then I could see this being super useful. So let's do a TBS message equals we replace the message, and then I know this will work for us.
The key is environment, not env.
Oh, okay. That is the best part about having a co-host on. Catch that.
Yeah, and if not, you'll get an error on the up will fail. We try to validate as much as we can, so the up will fail telling you it's not a valid key.
Gotcha. Awesome.
So yeah, as I said before, every time you do up, you'll see that the variable is getting attached, the volume, all your code is there, so the file synchronization will be slower. And something you can do for some projects, like especially if you're doing something with Node or you have a heavy repo, there's a file called .stignore that you can put the same pattern as git ignore if you don't want certain things to be synchronized, like your node modules folder, a chunky binary you may have that you don't want, especially when if you see that it's slowing down. That's something that can help.
Awesome. That is super helpful. I think that gets created if you let Okteto do your deployment for you, as opposed to referencing that existing one. So let's see here. All right, we replaced the message. So yeah, that was one of the best parts about the manifest that I enjoyed while playing around with it. So and there's some really awesome documentation here about all the different things you can do in the Okteto manifest. So if you're trying this out, definitely take a look at that and see all the cool stuff you can do here. All right, so that was pretty fun. But we want to show also how we can do this with Crossplane, right? So here, this is like a pretty simple application where we're just doing a web server. So we want to get a little more complex. So we're going to hop over to this application, which is basically just talking to a MySQL database and letting you create new records in the database and then list them, and also has a home page. So still pretty simple, but it's going to require a few more moving pieces. And you're doing all of this local development in Kubernetes, so it definitely makes sense to use a Kubernetes native way to provision any managed services you may use. And because this is being injected dynamically with secrets, then we will see how that can be kind of moved from different environments, from dev to staging to prod, and you'll automatically get those secrets populated for you. So what we need to start off by doing is provisioning a database for us to use in this application, and we'll use Crossplane for that. So you'll see earlier that we went ahead and installed Stack GCP, which allows us to have access to the GCP CRDs that represent our different resources. If you've watched the show before, you know that we have kind of dynamic and static provisioning, so you can just create a resource immediately, or you can create it dynamically, which means that you're essentially going to create a class for it. So here, if we want to create a Cloud SQL instance, we create a Cloud SQL instance class, which has common configuration that we might want to reuse. And then we'd use a generic MySQL claim to be able to reference that class, create a new resource, and then get that connection information to that resource propagated to the namespace of our MySQL instance here. So it's a powerful model. You can especially think of it in, let's say you're an organization and you have some namespaces in your Kubernetes cluster where your app teams are doing local development using Okteto. You could have various classes in your cluster because they're at the cluster scope level. And then whenever someone wanted a development database or a Redis cache or anything like that, or even a whole nother Kubernetes cluster, they could just create a claim for that and kind of be agnostic about how that's being satisfied. So it could be provided by a GCP Cloud SQL instance, and we're actually scheduling based on labels to that here to our Cloud SQL class. But it could be an RDS instance that can also do MySQL. Really, on the application side, we're just concerned about a MySQL database being available to us. So I'm going to go ahead and start walking through that, and I'll comment as appropriate. But before we do that, I wanted to call out a few more people in the chat here who joined. So it looks like we have Steven, who works on Crossplane. He's joining from Florida. And then Ram, I believe, from Bangalore, and Harsh from India, and then Suraj, Suraj is pretty active in the Crossplane Slack. I know it looks like we might have some more folks from the Okteto community joining, so that's awesome to see.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and Jared, who's one of the founders of the Crossplane project, joining from San Diego. Let's see. Looks like Ramiro, you've been pretty active here. I appreciate you following up with some of these folks.
Yeah, when you go through the demo, I was trying to make sure that some very interesting questions.
Definitely. Cool. Yeah, these are awesome. So yeah, everyone feel free to keep your questions coming as we work through this and show some of the different functionality. But I'm going to go ahead and start provisioning this database. Ramiro, if you have anything else you wanted to add about Okteto while I'm doing this, feel free to bring that up, or we can address some of the questions, but I'll just be working through this and it'll take a little bit of time.
Yeah, so something that came out of on the chat that I think is super interesting is because Okteto works at the pod level, you can use this for pretty much any component you have on Kubernetes. So it can be your app. Something that I find very useful that someone brought in is when you're creating an operator. Typically, those are kind of harder to test because you have to do them locally and then either use, some proxy like telepresence or just kind of like mock all these things and then deploy. With Okteto, you can deploy like the basic version of your operator, then do Okteto up to the actual code pod, and then iterate, write code, test end to end. I wrote a plugin for Cert Manager to provision certificates with this DNS called Sibo. Sibo, if you haven't tried it out, is this really cool cloud provider from England that they do K3S based clusters. And I was building an integration to do serve manager with them. And what's really cool is that you can iterate on all these other type of components, API services, operators, anything that has a pod. Functions. I gave a talk along with, you had Alex last week or last 2 weeks ago on the TBS, the OpenFast founder.
Mhm.
I gave a talk on how to integrate OpenFast with Okteto, and it works. It's pretty cool. It's something we're trying to be as general as possible to make it integrate with all these different Kubernetes pieces. As you said early on, because there's this common API, you can build a lot of really cool things, leveraging all different tools. So definitely try that out if you're building controllers. Like if when you're working on this on your loop, the I forgot the name of it, but when you have to check if it's updated, if it's deployed, it's
Mhm.
something where Okteto can help a lot, because that's one of the things that testing it in the cluster makes a lot more sense. You're seeing the behavior end to end, interaction with your CRDs, all those things. It's a cool scenario. We have some samples. We don't have a sample on an operator, but if anybody wants to try it out, write a sample. We're more than happy to list it on our repo. We have a section on our samples for the community. So anything cool you work with, like somebody in our, we are also on the Kubernetes Slack. There's an Okteto channel. So if you have any questions, you want to kind of share with the community what you're building, go there. We had this really cool conversation yesterday with someone who was building trying to get an Elixir app on Kubernetes with Okteto. That was like super interesting. We even have someone doing like C-based applications on Kubernetes, which kind of blew my mind. So yeah, try it out. It works for all these different. We're trying to make it as agnostic as possible, both from the stack as well as from Kubernetes. So try it out. And as I said earlier, if something you get stuck, go to Slack, file an issue in GitHub, and we'll try to help you as much as we can.
Awesome. Yeah, that is super cool. I was talking with Alex after that about you can kind of do a similar thing that we're going to show here, where you can inject the secrets from a managed service into your OpenFast app. So I could see just kind of all three of those, Okteto, Crossplane, and OpenFast, working pretty cool together there. So that would be awesome to see. So I just want to quickly comment on what's going on here. Hopefully you all have kind of seen what I've been up to while Ramiro has been talking about that. But so what we did was created the Cloud SQL instance class, and then a MySQL instance, which would be scheduled to it. And so that Cloud SQL instance class is at the cluster scope level, but this MySQL instance is in our Okteto namespace. So we'll see it here. You'll see that it bound to that Cloud SQL instance class we created. And the result of that was creating this Cloud SQL instance with name Okteto app MySQL. And the status is still blank, so it's not ready yet. If you want more info on that, we can see that managed claim is waiting for managed resource to become bindable. That basically just means that if we go and get the Cloud SQL instance that was created, that so it's still pending create, right? So we're not able to use it, which is essentially when we bind to a managed resource, we're saying, okay, we can now consume this from our application. So once this becomes available, which we can see it provisioning here also in the GCP console, and it shouldn't take too long, then we should be able to access it. And there's a number of different ways you can access a database on GCP, for instance. One of them would be using something like the Cloud SQL proxy, which is one of their recommended ways to do it. Today, if you want to look at what we're actually doing, is we're opening traffic to all IP addresses. So please do not do this. But we are showing it for today to make it a little bit easier to connect to it from our container and make it a little bit simpler of a process. Didn't want to introduce some of that extra connection stuff when we're trying to show a specific use case here. So it's still pending create. So I'll hop over here and talk a little bit about what our deployment and our application are going to be doing here. So if we look at our Kubernetes deployment here in our service, it looks very similar to the app we used in the previous example. In fact, the service is exactly the same except for the name and the port. But we've added a little bit here to the deployment. So we're still using that Okteto Hello World Going image, but you'll see that we're pulling these secrets from the MySQL connection secret. So that has to be present in the namespace Okteto. The way that's going to get there is we created our MySQL instance in the Okteto namespace. So once that becomes bound, then we're going to propagate that secret from the Cloud SQL instance manage resource into the namespace Okteto. And once we actually see this, so it looks like it's bound, we should be able to look in the Okteto namespace and see a MySQL connection secret. You'll see there's some data in that, and that's going to have all of our connection information to the database. We don't actually even need to look at that because we're just going to inject it automatically here. So the different fields in that MySQL connection, we're going to translate to environment variables that are going to be accessible by our application. Also, because this may be the first time we're connecting to this database, it may not exist yet. So you'll see in our application here, we're connecting to the database named Okteto. But the first time we connect, that's obviously not going to be created already. So we're going to run a simple init container that's basically going to install the MySQL client and create the database if it does not exist. So once again, to be able to do that init container, we can inject those same secrets in. So we can go ahead and do that. All right, so we're going to create our deployment like last time, and we can check here. So here's our Hello World 2 deployment. It looks like the init container is running. So after a few seconds, we should see that that's successful and our deployment is now running. So it sometimes takes a minute. All right, so now our pod is initializing. So that's what we want to see. And it's now running. So once again, we've created this deployment manually. And we are going to use actually the exact same configuration except for the name for the Okteto.yaml. And then we can go ahead and get started. Since we're in this directory, it's going to use Hello World 2 instead of Hello World, which was our previous one. We can go ahead and Okteto up in the Okteto namespace. And we're once again going to go through some of these steps that Ramiro has described. And once we're ready, we should be able to, similarly as we did earlier, run our main.go. And in here, we have a few different endpoints we can hit. So we have a home page, and we're going to log that too in our console when we hit that. And then we also have a create. So this will take post requests to create new records in our TBS stream schema. And then we can also list all the ones that exist. I'm using Gorm here to do this. So what that allows us to do is actually create this schema automatically if it doesn't exist. So defining our TBS stream schema as a struct here with JSON tags. And it actually, if this already exists, then it will just skip creation and we'll automatically be able to reference it. But looks like we're ready over here. So let's try it out.
So in this case, what you're seeing, every dev environment has its own volume. So the first time you do go run, it's going to download the dependencies. But then because they're cached, from now on, every time you do go run, they're already in your Go package folder there. You can see them. If you need to erase them, you can go and erase them in case some version get out of sync, whatever. And something that is also useful because you can keep your dev environment separate. You may want to cache different things. You might even need different versions of Go, different versions of Node, Ruby. So keep that in mind. That your dev environments are pretty much standalone, which really helps for keeping very specific configurations for that part of your application, like the ports you're forwarding, if you want to debugger or not, all those things.
Definitely. And that's super cool. That the first example, we didn't see it because we were actually just using the standard library for everything there. But as we brought in some outside packages, we were able to see what happens there. So, all right. So our homepage is working here. Nice. Welcome to the 11th episode of the binding status. And let's see if we have any records. Nope, we don't have any yet, which makes sense. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a record. So I just already have this set up here. So localhost 80, we said that create endpoint, and we'll just do a post request. So we're going to call this TBS stream Crossplane plus Okteto, and it's going to be Dan and Ramiro are the hosts here, and we have 1 million viewers, which is 100% accurate. So
about correct.
So let's hop down here. And you'll see here that we're also logging these here. So you saw where we hit the home page and then list. And looks like it was successful here. Request received to create. And if we refresh list here, it looks like we've got our record there. So yeah, so this is really awesome. It's a cool thing to see. Another thing, bringing back in that environment that you can specify and overwrite with the Okteto.yaml. So maybe when you're actually running for real, that you have your secret stored in your MySQL connection secret here. But when you're doing development, you want to specify secrets that have you use like SQLite or something, or you have another development database. If you just specify that in the environment, as we did earlier with the variable in Okteto.yaml, then we can just overwrite those environment variables and connect to a different database. And especially the way we've structured this is actually agnostic about where it's going, because it's going to set up the database for us. So that makes it really reusable. We're able to put it in different environments, and it's pretty powerful abstraction we have there.
And another feature we just released on, I think it was on 1.6 or 7, is you can also, in the port forward, you can configure your manifest to also automatically port forward to other services in your namespaces. It doesn't have to be just ports on your dev environment. So you could, in this example, for instance, add a forward to the MySQL service. It's based on the service name, which then means you could, if you need like to launch something like, I don't know, a local SQL client because you want to do queries or do more heavy editing, that also helps, especially if you follow best practices and you don't have your database exposed to the world. It's a way if you need to run some scripts, if you're like want to, I don't know, do some SQL explain to know what's going on with your database. It's also something, it's in documentation. It's new. So it's something that I think is very valuable. It's again, helping you connect locally to your full dev environment.
That's awesome. That sounds like really, really awesome functionality, especially if you're running those services in cluster. One thing we've talked about is actually kind of just like running proxy servers for external resources as well. So you can get that same kind of functionality of referencing a service and using like a service mesh and that sort of thing. So that would be pretty cool. So that was successful. I'm going to go ahead and delete our MySQL instance claim, which we'll see here will result in our secret being cleaned up because it has owner references to it. So we have just these Okteto hello world secrets, and MySQL connection is gone. And then we should also see that our Cloud SQL instance was cleaned up. So no resources found. So we've cleaned up that database, and we could provision a new one if we wanted to. But I think that's the majority of the functionality we're going to show here today. We're getting towards the end of the show, and I want to do a bit of wrap up, starting off with we're releasing a new version of Crossplane tomorrow. So I want to take a quick look at the roadmap, which is fairly accurate. A big thing that we're going to see coming in here is template stacks. So this is really cool functionality that's kind of still in preview. But you can see some examples of it, especially if we hop over to, I'll keep this here. If we hop over to, let's see, WordPress, for example. So right now, to have this WordPress controller running that basically takes a WordPress CRD and creates the necessary resources behind the scenes for it, we still have to have some controller logic here, which we don't want everyone, especially app owners, to have the right controller logic to be able to repeatedly deploy their application agnostically across different cloud providers. So what we're doing is we have now in Crossplane a template stack engine, which basically allows you to use common configuration tools like customization or Helm, and you don't actually have to write any code here. So you'll see all of that controller logic is gone. And what we have here is just a Helm chart that's doing things like creating the database with a MySQL instance, so similar to we did before. And then if you look at the example, we define the CRD that's going to be created, and then you can create that. So without actually writing any Go code or really even doing anything but kube control apply, you're able to install new stacks and define them as Helm or customize. I think actually on our simple stack GCP, which is basically just an installation of a group of GCP resources for us that if we look over at the fork here, that it is actually using Customize instead of Helm. So a lot of the ways you've already set up your applications to be deployed, now you can just port them over and it's going to be a lot easier. So we're excited about that. And Hostware Stack Manager, which I'm not going to get in today, but I'd like to have Hassan, who did a lot of work on this. I think that he drove most of this here. So I'd like to have him on TBS sometime to talk about it. And we've got work for defining your own claim kind. So right now we have MySQL instance and all these abstract types. We'd like for you to be able to define other claims you want without having to write your own CRDs. We're also just increasing the fidelity of some of our GCP resources. And then logging and eventing has landed here. So now in our different resources, you'll get a clearer view about what's happening on the cloud provider. So that's a quick rundown about what's happening for 0.8, and that should be coming tomorrow. So we're excited for that. But before we go here, I wanted to give Ramiro a chance to talk a little bit about the vision and future of Okteto and where he thinks they're going and kind of what he's excited about.
Of course. So for us, the vision is really to push this idea further of moving more and more pieces of development to the cluster, just to make it easier to build cloud native apps. So some of the things we're working on right now that I'm super excited about is, one is tighter integration with IDEs. I don't know if you've seen that VS Code has this really cool remote development mode. So we wrote a plugin for Okteto, so you can install it on VS Code and then launch your dev environment into Kubernetes from VS Code and connect. So we're doing a lot of investigation on how can we bring this experience to other IDEs, PyCharm, PHP Storm, IntelliJ in particular. They have this really cool remote mode as well that we're trying to figure out how to integrate. And the other big thing we're working on next is, as someone in the chat mentioned, you need to, at some point, you need to build your image and test everything end to end. So we're working on another command next to up to automate all of this for you. So we want the flow to be super natural, where you're working on dev environment. At some point, you exit, you run one command, and automatically, it builds, it tags your image, it redeploys, and then you get this end-to-end experience. Especially with something that I'm really interested about is, and if you see the CLI, there's this build command, is moving the Docker builds to the cluster as well to make it a lot faster. So you don't have to, download everything in your local machine. And something that we have implemented in cloud, in Okteto Cloud right now, if you want to try it out. Early on, we're still trying to figure out how to make it available to more people, but it's something that I'm really excited about, is honestly like not having to run Docker on my machine, but still being able to build, deploy, and everything. It's something that I'm really, really excited about. We have in our repo, we publish a month in advance, kind of like where we're going in terms of features, and we're always asking for help, always asking for feedback. So if you're interested, go there. It's in the Okteto repo issues. There's a milestone. We'll file an issue every month there on kind of what we were thinking we should work on the month. And then if you see something that you're interested, pick it up. If there's something where you see that something's lacking, make a comment. We're trying to make this open source. We're already open of the plans and what we want to work on, and integration with everything. That's something that like the demo that Dan put together today is very exciting, and I'm really looking forward to see what other pieces of Kubernetes we can integrate with. But that's where we're at. Dev environments, applicability, make it as faster as possible to develop cloud applications. And if you're in Kubernetes, you should try Okteto. And if you like it, start a repo. We're in the Kubernetes Slack on the #Okteto. And if you're in Bangalore, there's the Okteto meetup coming. It's going to be really cool. Sangam, who's in the chat, is going to be giving a workshop on how to use Okteto. So that's something that I'm super excited. I'm going to join via Zoom call. Sadly, SF to Bangalore is a bit of a long flight, but you never know. Maybe for the next meetup, I might be there.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for that summary, Ramiro, and also for pointing us to that issue. That's really useful, so we know where to look to see how, if we have any functionality we like implemented, or if we could help implement some of that, how we can come alongside y'all. So Thanks especially for coming on today. This was a great episode. It was really useful to have you alongside, pointing out the different parts of Okteto that I don't understand, and kind of providing also the commentary in the chat. I think that was super valuable. And I think a lot of viewers got a lot out of it. So thank you. We really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to doing more integrations with Crossplane Okteto.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me. This was very, very exciting. I think this is the first live YouTube stream I've done, so this is super cool. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, and I hope the viewers also enjoyed. And let's keep working on this. Really cool.
Awesome. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, then. See you, everyone.